just going to click OK. Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you today. Today, we have our first PGSSC Global Surgery Research Seminar. And today's topic is on multi-site randomized trials in global surgery. We have two wonderful speakers with us today that I'm very honored to be able to introduce. Before we talk about our speakers, I would like to tell you all a little bit about the PGSSC Global Surgery Research Seminar. This is an 8-session series designed to explore methods and outcomes of global surgery research. Each session will have 2 speakers who will be talking on similar topics or methodologies, and there will also be about 30 minutes at the end for open discussion for each section, and we believe this to be a very exciting part of the conversation as well, just to highlight the excellent work of our speakers in each session. This is recorded, and so the videos will be posted after the seminar. In case it affects future seminars, you are required to register for each seminar in advance and separately. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about our next research seminar. Our next session will be in November, as we are doing some PGSSC internal work during the month of October. The PGSSC Global Surgery Research Seminar is organized by Dr. Boatin and Dr. Het Gauthier. So we're very grateful for their hard work on this process. Our PGSSC fellows and RAs that have done a tremendous job of organizing these sessions include Kate Isoken, Megan Lim, Sarah Nuss, and Mehreen Zygum. For more information on each of these sessions, please feel free to go to the website that you see here, or you're also welcome to email me or any of the people on this slide for additional information as well. It's an honor to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Yang is professor at the Department of Surgery in Seoul National University Hospital and Seoul National University College of Medicine. He's also the director of the Cancer Hospital at Seoul National University Hospital. He's involved in several large-scale randomized control trials for gastric cancer treatment. He was Korean PI of a phase 3 study examining the role of gastrectomy in stage 4 gastric cancer with a single incurable factor. He is investigator on multiple clinical trials, including the CLASSIC trial, the CLASS trials, and is also the Korean PI of a phase 2 study examining the role of neoadjuvant imatinib treatment in large GIST tumors. He's the founding chairman of the Korean Laparoscopic Gastrointestinal Surgery Group, and his translational interests are related to gastric carcinogenesis, familial gastric cancer, and biomarkers, and developing a model for gastric cancer. He's chairman of the board of directors, the Korean Cancer Association, the secretary general-elect of the IGCA, and honorary fellow of the American Surgical Association. He's also part of other organizations, including being an honorary member of the European Surgical Association, honorary international fellow of Japanese Society of Endoscopic Surgery, and a member of the Korean Academy of Science and Technology. He is editor of multiple journals and has given over 300 invited lectures, and many of these have included live demonstrations of gastrectomy. The title of his talk today is Extensive Peritoneal Lavage with Saline After Curative Gastrectomy for Gastric Cancer. Thank you so much, Dr. Yang, for being with us today.
Thank you, Kevda, for your wonderful introduction of myself. Let me share my screen. Now you can see my slide. Okay, and then first of all, it's my first but great opportunity to share my multi-site randomized trials with you today. And yes, this 2.5 years we suffered. All my airplanes are shut down there. And I felt like that after 2 years, but this was me in March. This is my gallbladder, and I had a severe cholecystitis, and because of my schedule, my operation for patient, I did not realize it's my cholecystitis getting worse. Actually, it was a really empyema, and when I received a percutaneous tube drainage, about a month later, I received the staged cholecystectomy. So why I'm telling you is once you become a patient, you would realize how doctors do not know about real pain of a patient. So laparoscopic cholecystectomy, everybody say, oh, you will have no pain after cholecystectomy. No, it was so painful. And the next day, the doctor told me, you can discharge, you can go home. No, I want to stay one more week with a more painkiller. So we have to be careful about that. And this is my COI. And actually, in our human life, there has been a lot of development or progress in different areas: evolution, technology, innovation. And why we do this? Probably in a free market, it's money or fame. But in our medicine, it is for human well-being. And in this evolution or innovation, technology development, for medicine, we have to be careful about the safety, patient protection, and that is about ethics too, important. So I want to quote my mentor, Professor Kitajima in Keio University. He emphasized that our surgical skill should be supported by science. And that's, again, ethics. At the Seoul National, because in Korea, we have a lot of gastric cancer, and we had reached 30,000 cumulative cases of gastric, which would be one of the highest in the world. And not only the quantity, how many cases we are working on. With my team, we have a rather basic science experience in United States or French. We have working on science. What is science? In practice, we are observing some findings and get clinical question, and then formulate some research, and then we will get the conclusion. And this has been repeated: practice, research, and practice and research. So through clinical questions. So it is important to catch up proper clinical questions. And for gastric cancer, as you know, in worldwide, about 1 million new cases in a year. That's quite high. And like other solid cancer, it is a localized, regional, and systemic disease. So depending on the stage, we have a different treatment modality. And just let me show you, this is gastric cancer, our standard treatment, resection specimen, and not only the primary cancer here, but you notice here lymph node enlarged, and there are metastases. So this solid tumor lymph node metastasis is important. And also not only surgical, this gastric cancer treatment, we have lots of different specialties like gastroenterology, medical oncology, radiology, or nuclear medicine doctors, radiation oncology, and especially pathologist is important for our treatment. And during the past 20 years, what we have achieved, H-index, when you're looking at using keyword gastric cancer in the world, top 20. Here's Dr. Bang, he is a medical oncologist, our pathologist, myself, and our gastroenterologist in the top 20. So this is just one slide demonstrate how Seoul National, we are working together and also leading the gastric cancer research. And for the last 20 years, we have worked on surgical or adjuvant chemotherapy or stage 4 cancer. Each stage, we selected the important clinical questions. And yes, as you may heard about, one very smart surgeon did no scar appendectomy, no abdominal scar. How he did? Through endoscope and the transgastric and appendectomy, but was not recognized. Why? Because it was not through a proper IRB process. So what I would like to again emphasize here is result may be appreciated, but very important. Without good proper process, we cannot get a good credit. And to adopt a new surgical technique, when it become a standard treatment, all different ways, maybe personal experience or retrospective, but the randomized trial, as you know, this level of evidence is important. And for the necessity of a clinical trial, not in the single institute, multi-center, and the multinational, would be because of different reasons, faster accrual of a patient, or better quality, or more important, it would be generalization. And especially for rare diseases such as GIST, we had a great by working together, international. So minimal invasive surgery, as you know, a surgery for, this is my teacher's gastrectomy, 1975. And but we are still doing a similar way. But on the other hand, we are using a laparoscopic approach, which is putting camera in the peritoneal cavity, and we can see better magnified view, so we can do a fine dissection. Then by approaching laparoscope, does this approach come with less complication or even a better survivor? That's the question. So when we have a new technique, not simply go to the patient, we need training ourselves and also justification with the data. So early 2000, we had animal lab to train ourselves. And this one is how surgeons are eager to get a new technique. This was a hybrid endoscopic laparoscopic procedure. And we made it as our class group, study group, as an official under the umbrella of a Korean Gastric Cancer Association. And also, in addition, in domestic, but we had joint seminar with the Japanese leaders, and that provide us podium for the sharing the study or experience, but also we could write a textbook with the leading surgeons from Japan and Korea together for each chapters. And then China, as you know, a huge population. So China, they are having 500,000 new gastric cancer cases per year. That's huge. So Chinese friends, why not? We are joining this joint. So now all three countries are every year for the progress of our treatment. And this time H index based by keyword gastrectomy, that means surgeons in the world, top 100. And you notice here, so national, but the red circle are Korean doctors. Traditionally, Japanese doctors were dominant. And yes, still 39 from Japan, 26 from Korea. And here, the blue dot are Chinese doctors. They are coming. They are improving, publishing more and more papers. They are interested in clinical trials and multi-center trials. So for gastric, because the three countries are very high instance, but also high number of cases, and also a lot of clinical trials, we are working together. And for the one simple study here is class 02, which is comparing laparoscope versus open surgery in advanced cancer, and demonstrating that non-inferiority of laparoscope surgery, but with less surgical complication. So before we have that evidence, as you notice here at the Seoul National, large proportion, over 90% are laparoscopically for stage 1 because we had already class 1 data. But for advanced stage, we didn't put laparoscope that high. Why? Because we did not have clinical scientific evidence, and not because we did not have surgical skill. After we have a class 02 end of 2020, now we have more laparoscopic surgery. So I want to emphasize here again, we have to differentiate general practice versus experimental surgery. And class 2 members celebrated this achievement. And so the success of this class group is that this is an institute, and you see Seoul National, Yonsei, or Catholic major centers contribute not only one study, but continuing all different topics of our multi-center trials. So we have lots of publications in high impact journal continuing, and Nature Reviews Clinical Oncology mentioned our group as a master class in laparoscopic gastrectomy, and why we were successful. As noticed here, we have shared the PI or chairmanship, shared leadership, and contribution-based credit, not by age or power, but contribution. That means enrollment of cases. So that makes every member do their best. And also another important factor was I gave opportunity to Dr. Lee to conduct class 4, and Dr. Kim gave Dr. Park for class 5. So let younger generation be in charge of the study, PI of the study. That made really pushed up our class group. So importance is a power of working together. So as using this, doing this kind of clinical trials, it is directing right choice for each controversial clinical questions. And used to be, this is usually my 1 week gastric cancer operation. And among them, I had quite a number of patients join clinical trial. This is the role of academic surgeons at the National University. And outpatient clinic, this is today's my outpatient clinic. Here's a doctor patient's chair, but on the wall, there are each clinical trials ongoing. So I can remind or explain to my patient about potential participation of their these trials. Again, back to gastric cancer biology, when it become with a distant metastasis, it is we have known that surgical role is decreasing, but some surgeons are arguing, oh, we can do the surgery with less complication now. Chemotherapies are strong, so we should do gastrectomy. It has been questioned. So reduction surgery. So this is a peritoneal metastasis. Should we do a gastrectomy? So this is a clinical question, and then this is a first collaboration between Japan and Korea. I want to recognize Dr. Sano from Japan surgeon. He actually called me, and he wants to promote collaboration between Japan and Korea. So he asked me to invite all leading surgeons from Korea. So leading surgeons from high volume center. High volume centers means in 1 year, they operate almost 1,000 or more cases of gastric cancer. And next year, we gathered in Japan again. So this is important. Why I put here surgeon, medical oncologist, because used to be surgeon work by themselves, medical oncologist by themselves. But this gastric cancer, especially at the edge of the border, we have to work together. And so we choose a gastrectomy for advanced tumor in 2 Asian countries. So the name for this trial was Regatta. So Regatta is, as you know, boat racing. So Korea, Japan investigators are running to finish enrollment as soon as possible to find right answer to our patient, whether our patient are suffering unnecessary surgery or we have to give a surgery which can give a better survival for our stage 4 cancer. And but before we start the study, we should make sure both groups are quite comparable. So first, a data center visit. This was a data center in Seoul. You see the Japanese doctors, especially Dr. Fukuda from Japan. He's a JCOG Japanese group data center manager. He was very strict about data center. He's looking at SOP, and you see, he's like an inspector, policeman, audit. And at that time, we had already developed using web-based randomized data collection. So at the end of a visit, yes, he accepted. So we started this trial. So for stage 4 cancer with a single non-curable, chemotherapy has been standard, but challenging question is the gastrectomy can improve. So together with the Japanese and Korean doctors having multiple studies and also visiting each center for surgical equalization. And then for issues international trials, we did not have much problem with the ethnic difference because of Korean, Japanese, so we are Asian, but regulatory issues or surgical procedure, we try to meet more often to overcome this kind of a discrepancy. And also there's some difference in the staging system too, or definition response or endpoint we had to discuss. And meanwhile, Jimmy So, he from National University of Singapore, he is interested in, actually Singapore, they have maybe gastric cancer a year less than 1,600 about or 900. So, but he has interest. He has running Singapore gastric cancer consortium, and but to join, he also has to go through all the process, data center. But actually, because of our web-based data center works by internet, so Jimmy So, his group would enroll the cases through our data center. And finally, he also start enrollment and site visit. And but like other clinical trial, enrollment is quite delayed, slow. And at half enrollment from Japan, Korea, and enrollment is 1.4 per month, both countries. And one case enrolled from Singapore. It is one case, but it's a very precious. And to enroll one case, he had to go through all the process. And the interim analysis showed gastrectomy was not superior than chemotherapy alone. And that made a termination of the study. But on the other hand, subgroup analysis demonstrate that upper 1/3, when you do a total gastrectomy, it's even worse than chemotherapy. So the conclusion here is that chemotherapy is a standard, and we have to avoid total gastrectomy for chemotherapy in this advanced cancer. And for the Regatta, we had different issues, but the most difficult one was a low speed enrollment. And some lessons from regatta is it was a quite first time where they organized a randomized trial. So it was a great impact for Korean investigators. And we had built up a scientific friendship and importance of data center and also research ethics too. And because enrollment was we wanted to discuss every single case and even follow up, but it was not appropriate because it can provide some possible bias. And some hurdles during this study is some insufficient assurance of a clinical equipoise. That means some investigator was a little bit more prone to surgery or prone to chemotherapy. So to join a clinical study, investigators should be sure he has no conclusion about or bias to or any of clinical the treatment arms. And also because of a slow enrollment, our researchers lost some interest. So it was a burden for us. And because of this conclusion, we were able to move to the next topic, that is conversion surgery. Chemotherapy first, and then responding group patient, we can consider operation. And for the gastric cancer surgery, if this lymph node is a positive metastasis during our dissection, it may spill cancer cells. That has been shown by our group 2011, and also one study from Kumamoto, Japan, extensive intraoperative peritoneal lavage of a 10-liter saline with intraperitoneal chemotherapy improved the survival, but it is only 88 patients. And but on the other hand, some other studies showed no difference by extensive lavage. So Dr. Jimmy So, he raised a hand. He want to prove extensive lavage of peritoneal cavity, diluting out free cancer cells may improve survival, lower complication rate. And with 16 major hospitals, and we enrolled 800 very well as planned, and 152 from Seoul National and 150 from Peking and other centers. And this has been summarized in last year paper, and unfortunately, the hypothesis did not proven by this overall survival, no difference, and the peritoneal recurrence has no significant difference. But although the result was negative, this collaboration will continue for our gastric cancer research among Asian countries. And lastly, sharing experience. Yes, we have international visitors, and also we celebrate scientific brothership around the world, especially 3 countries, Japan, Korea, China. And but also we are helping Mongolia. Korean Gastric Cancer Association visit Mongolia to promote gastric cancer awareness and also sharing. And also with this event, Mongolian Gastric Cancer Society was established only in 1 year. They already proposed a screening program to the government and a proposed treatment guideline. As you know, in Mongolia, it became world highest incidence of gastric cancer. Korea used to be the highest, but now Mongolia. And so these are our academic background. But now, as a chairman of Korean Innovative Medical Technology Society, I have noticed we need industry in our circle, take advantage of their resources, not driven by industry, but we can have industry as a partner for the development. So because of time, I want to stop here, but let me just important is also for surgical quality control, especially surgical skill equilibration is important. And investigator for surgical study, we have to recognize our contributors and surgeon who enrolled cases and sharing data with among investigators. And so sometimes very case operations not proven, we should do that. If you want to do that, you should be under clinical trial environment. So we should not waste our patient data. And also lastly, expense for the clinical study should be ideally government, because it will be make ourselves neutral, or public foundations or hospital, but not to the patient. That we should not give a burden to patient choose some unconfirmed study, because medical oncology, it is already, it's a quite common practice. Patients are not taking care of any expense, but surgical, sometimes we are a little bit in the middle. So thank you very much.
Dr. Yang, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I think many of us on this call aspire to do multi-center studies, and you've taken it even a step farther, multi-country studies. So congratulations on your excellent work, and thank you so much for presenting. I'm just going to share my screen one more time in order to provide our introduction for our next speaker. All right, so Dr. Ademuyiwa, thank you so much for being with us today. It's once again such an honor to provide the introduction for you. Dr. Ademuyiwa qualified from the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan in Nigeria in 1998. In 2007, he was a fellow of the West African College of Surgeons. He did his fellowship in the Medical College of Surgeons in Nigeria in pediatric surgery in 2009. His residency training in pediatric surgery was at the Obafemi Awolowo University Teaching Hospitals Complex in Nigeria. He is the chief of the Pediatric Gastroenterology and Colorectal Unit at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital in Lagos, Nigeria. He's also professor of surgery at the University of Lagos and has served as a visiting scholar in South Africa, the UK, and in the United States. He also serves as the director of the NIHR Global Surgery Unit at Lagos Hub and is a member of the steering committee of Global PedSurg Collaborative. He is the executive secretary of the Pan-African Pediatric Surgical Association and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Sciences. His specific areas of interest include gastroenterology surgery, minimally invasive surgery, neonatal surgery, colorectal surgery, and surgical education. His talk today is titled Reducing Surgical Site Infections in Low-Income and Middle-Income Countries, the Falcons Trial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Kavitha. I will now try to share my screen. Can I go ahead?
Yes, perfect. It should be ready now.
Okay. Right. I hope we can all see it.
Perfect.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the distinguished global audience listening to us. And I want to congratulate Professor Han Yang, who incidentally was at the ACS as international guest scholar the same year I had the Community Surgeon Travel Award. It's a pleasure meeting you again. My talk today is centered on preventing surgical site infection using randomized control trials to evaluate the intervention. I think I've been adequately introduced by Kavitha, and I thank her for that. These are my disclosures, just to say that although the Falcon trial was funded by the National Institute for Health Research, the Global Health Research Unit, The grant sponsors had no role in the design, the data analysis, results, and dissemination of findings. The learning objective today is that I'm hoping that at the end of this lecture, listeners and participants will be able to explain the basis for choosing surgical site infection as a research topic to be studied in low and middle income setting, and also to outline some of the steps that we had to take in setting up hospital networks in these settings. For some of us, it's actually the very first time we're going to be involved in such large trials. And then I'm hoping also that at the end of this lecture, we will be able to discuss the main findings from our trial and what the implications it has for practice. So why did we choose surgical site infection? I think it's important that I start this lecture by starting from the very beginning. I've alluded to the fact that I was at Washington, D.C. in 2013 as an award winner for the Community Surgeon Travel Award of the American College of Surgeons. As part of that award, I was to have an observership at the Nationwide Children's Hospital, where I had the opportunity of meeting Professor Benedict Nwome, who is a pediatric surgeon and who was the one that invited me. On one of our award rounds, he informed me about a new group called the Global Search Team, who are trying to conduct multi-center international studies, at that time, basically observational. And I said, look, I'm really interested. And then Mr. Anil Bango, then he was a resident at Birmingham, sent me some emails and we had video chats. And then we started discussing about global search. And I should say that one of our discussions centered on whether we should include children in some of the trials. And I advocated for that, and I'm happy that we have been doing that ever since. This eventually culminated in a 2016 meeting in Birmingham, where Professor John Morton, the Balin Chair of Surgery at the University of Birmingham, coordinated the meeting, and we had several people from low and middle income countries represented in the meeting, and we were then able to determine certain benchmarks. First and foremost, we had low and middle income country surgeons, researchers, and those from high income countries participating in the same room, brainstorming. And then the research prioritization outlined was based on the perceived needs by low and middle income country partners. So it wasn't a kind of the high income country determining what we actually wanted. We told them what our challenges were, and then we prioritized it. And then the low and middle income country researchers, like myself, were involved from the concept and design of these studies through to the implementation, write-up, and dissemination. And we also decided at that meeting that capacity building was very, very important for us to move forward as a collaborative. I must say that at that point, we did not have any grants, but we're ready to work together. And then came the very first work of our group, which was Global Surge 1, published in British Journal of Surgery, which looked at mortality of emergency abdominal surgery in high, middle, and low income countries. And the essential finding is that mortality is about 3 times higher in low and middle income countries compared to high income countries. And we also noticed that that surgical site infection is a very important complication that required further inquiry. Excuse me, please. Excuse me. Now, so we then decided that we were going to look at surgical site infection on its own. And this was why we then conducted the surgical site infection following gastrointestinal surgery in high income, middle income, and low income countries, which was published in the Lancet. Again, here, the main thing, I don't know if you can see my cursor, is that surgical site infection in low income country is about 2.5 times that of high income country. And we felt that this disparity, something should be done. An interventional study should be done. And just about that time, we then got a grant of about £7 million to test interventions to reduce surgical site infection, which was the Falcon trial. And we decided to make sure that we test 2 interventions in the same trial, and see, this was based on some of the recommendations that have been made by the World Health Organization. So when we were going to start, there were 7 hubs, and these included the countries you have seen, and these are their leads. I led for Nigeria. The WHO guidelines had suggested that alcoholic chlorhexidine was better than alternatives, as well as the fact that triclosan-coated sutures were far better than plain sutures. So, however, those guidelines admitted that many of the evidence were either low to moderate strength evidence. If you look at these, the recommendation 4.7 on skin preparation, the panel recommended alcoholic-based antiseptic solution for surgical site skin preparation. If you read this, it says a meta-analysis of available studies, low quality of evidence, show that alcohol-based chlorhexidine gluconate is beneficial in reducing surgical site rates compared to alcohol-based povidone iodine. They also said that the recommendation was for adult patients only, because there were very, very few data in pediatric patients. The recommendation 422 suggested that triclosan suture was better for the purpose of reducing risk of SSI independent of the surgery. So because of the admittance of low level of evidence, we decided to test the 2 interventions in low and middle income countries. So our trial was a 2-by-2 factorial trial. It was a randomized control trial. The surgeons were not blinded, but the assessors of wound outcomes were blinded to the arm that the patient belonged to. And then we stratified the patients into 2 groups, the clean contaminated group on one hand, and then patients with contaminated and dirty wounds on the other hand. And the patients must have at least an incision of 5 centimeters or greater. Laparoscopic surgery was not excluded, and once the exit wound is up to 5 centimeters. Otherwise, they were excluded from the trial. So this trial was undertaken in 54 different hospitals in 7 countries mentioned earlier. The patients were randomized, computer randomized from Europe. Okay. So the randomization was ratio 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 based on the interventions, either to alcoholic chlorhexidine group or povidone iodine, or triclosan coated group, or the plain suture group. And they were stratified based on the wound type. Based on the power of the study, we had anticipated recruiting 5,480 patients. And then we plan to analyze on that. Now, the main thing is, what were the lessons we learned as a low and middle income country preparing for this randomized control trial? Nigeria, one of the 7 countries that participated, contributed about a third or more. And this was based on some of the initial planning that we had done, some of which I hope to share now. So prior to the commencement of the trial, the first thing we did was that at my hospital, the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, we formed a research team that included pediatric surgeons, general surgeons, urologists, and obstetrician and gynecologists, because the abdominal incisions that we were going to recruit cut across these different specialties. And we encouraged centers that were also recruited across the country. We recruited 11 additional centers. So in all, we had 12 from Nigeria. They also formed these research teams. The team members, all of them, had trainings in research ethics and global clinical practice. And for some centers, that was the first time they were actually being exposed to some of these trainings. And we felt that that was a huge benefit, not just the fact that we are doing research or contributing data, but there was also capacity building in low and middle income countries. We had due diligence between the hub, between our hospital and Birmingham, based on research governance, financial governance, and data archiving. Then this was followed by a clinical trial agreement that was signed. And then we then recruited staff for the hub. And before the trial started, we from the hub ensure that we have national health research ethics approval, because by law, once a trial is going to involve more than 3 different sites within the country, you must have the National Health Research Ethics Committee approval. And then in addition to that, all the institutions that participated had their institutional research ethics approval as well. Because we were working with sutures and antiseptics, we had to receive the FDA approval. And then we had several soft SIV. SIV is the site initiation visit, and which was done, this was pre-COVID period, was done online. And then later we had the ad SIV, in which people came from the clinical trials unit of the University of Birmingham to train us. And we had the 12 hospitals in one room having that training. And then we developed the concept of green light, in which there is a checklist for all the requirements that must be met before you can start recruitment into the trial. So the trial recruitment itself involved consent, informed consent. So there are 2 consents that we gain for everyone recruited into the trial. The first one is for the surgery, which is the consent is gained by the surgical team. And then the second one is for the trial, which is done either by a member of the surgical team or the research nurse, which has been trained for the purpose. In Nigeria, teenagers must be assented, even though the consent is from the parents, but they must give their assent. And we also make sure that we complied with that rule. We did our randomization when the patient is already at the red line, because we do not want unnecessary reasons for cancellation. The case report forms were filled, hard copy, and then uploaded later. We followed up on the wards, and then the follow-up at 30 days for the outcome was conducted by the plastic surgeon as well as the pediatrician. And these were blinded to the different arms that the patient belonged to. And when patients could not come, the research nurse did a telephone follow-up. Any adverse effect events were reported. We continue to have regular meetings. We visited many of our spokes, troubleshot for those that have issues, and we also trained their data manager in data archiving and data management. So essentially, the analysis was done by intention to treat and the trial was registered. So what are the main findings from our study? We eventually recruited 5,788 patients from 7 different countries in 54 hospitals. And we had over 3,000 in clean contaminated arm and 2,697 in the dirty arm. The overall surgical site infection rate is still very high, even though it's similar to what we found in Global Surge 2. It's 22%. For the clean contaminated arm, it was 15.5%, and dirty arm was 30%. There was no difference based on the different interventions, either in reoperation rate, 30-day mortality, or surgical site infection rate. There was exactly no difference. So our conclusion was that there is currently, based on this very large trial, that there is no evidence at the moment supporting recommendation of 2% alcohol chlorhexidine or triclosan sutures for routine use. We believe that this was a very high quality, pragmatic, and well-reported trial, and we are advocating that there will be a change in the guideline based on this new evidence. We noticed that the high surgical site infection rate still predominates in low and middle income countries. Post-trial, we were involved in author list compilation. You will imagine that several people were involved in such big trials as ours. We were involved also in the statistical analytical plan that was done. Then some people were invited to the writing group and were involved in the writing, and then the publication process, as well as dissemination, which also included some press coverage. So permit me to just acknowledge a few people who have contributed. These are some of my teachers who have really contributed to the success of the trial. Many of these people are the spoke PIs who manned the different hospitals where the trial took place. Then we had some of the staff within the hub who also participated. And we have colleagues from Edinburgh and Birmingham who have become friends, who really contributed in capacity building during the trial. And these are people in my unit and department who are also very helpful. So what are the implications for practice? I think first, Falcon has shown that the two interventions are the same. And because some of the interventions are more expensive than the other, there is no reason for using them routinely. This trial has emboldened surgeons from low and middle income countries that cheaper alternatives does not necessarily increase the risk of surgical site infection. So prior to this time, based on the guidelines, it was difficult for surgeons in low and middle income countries to say, look, if I use the plain suture, the infection rate is the same. But now this trial has emboldened us to say that's actually the result. The second thing is that in many low and middle income countries, health insurance is really very low. The coverage could be as low as 5% in some countries. And so most patients pay out of pocket. And the Lancet Commission on Surgery has shown that catastrophic expenditure could be as high as 50% in some countries. Therefore, having these cheaper alternatives is going to lessen the burden on the pockets of patients who pay out of pockets. Finally, I think another great implication of our trial is that it may be difficult to cut and paste randomized controlled trial results done only in high-income countries and paste them and juxtapose them to resource-constrained setting. I think it's important that if we are going to be doing trials that will benefit low and middle-income countries, it's important that the trials are also done in such settings. In closing, permit me to say two things. The first is nihil de nobis sine nobis. This saying has been credited to James Charlton, who was involved in disability rights. He had it between conversation between Michael Masuta and William Rowland. And it means nothing about us without us. I think I've just made that point, that trials that will involve low and middle income countries should involve their surgeon researchers also. Secondly, I saw this in Liberia, and it says none of us is stronger than all of us. When we come together and work together, the output is going to be synergistic, not just additive. I want to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I think I was most inspired by the specific yet also universal nature of your conclusions. I think that your findings are very important for what we do in the US, particularly with regards to our very frequent assumption that what is expensive is better. And I think that is definitely not the case, certainly in your findings. And I think we have a lot to learn from you. So thank you very much. I would like to open the floor to questions from our audience. I'm happy to start, and then we'll open the process for the group. We'll continue with questions and answers until around 10:25, and then we'll conclude with some final remarks. My first question, one for Dr. Yang and one for Dr. Ademuyiwa. For Dr. Yang, I think it's so inspiring that you are collaborating in multiple countries. How do you recommend that surgeons control for technical variation? I think that's one thing that I found challenging, is that every surgeon wants to continue with their own technique. And is that something that you recommend controlling for in the process of study design or later on in study analysis? What do you recommend?
Yes, that's a very critical question, because like a clinical trial with a new drug, pharmaceutical agent, it is quite easy to control. But surgery, because if different surgeons perform, for example, gastrectomy with a lymph node dissection with a different level, then that will affect the result and bias to the result. So that's the importance to quality control. And my first experience about quality control was rather at the classic study. It was for the adjuvant trial. So we were supposed to have the same operation and same radical surgery, T2 dissection, and then these patients will be divided and randomized into no adjuvant chemotherapy versus adjuvant chemotherapy. So at that time, we were sharing video, only sharing video. We did not tell, oh, that surgeon cannot join. But that was for the first time show the video. And but in our class group, now our study group is more like investigator apply for the joining study. Then the surgeon, he or she is expected to submit at least 2 video, like open surgery versus laparoscope surgery, and then independent reviewers will score each step and then feedback for that applicants. And then if it is acceptable, it will be accepted. But if it is rejected, should improve a certain area. So through this qualification process, we can have a more homogeneous group. But also during this enrollment period, we keep sharing surgical technique. That's the way how we could improve the quality or equalization of surgical technique. That is a very, very important for surgical trial.
Thank you very much. And my question for Dr. Ademuyiwa, availability of preoperative antibiotics is something that we all know does affect the risk of surgical site infection. Do you think we need to look into standardizing ways of delivering preoperative antibiotics for surgical patients in low-income countries? And should we also be considering partnerships with pharmaceutical companies? Or what do you think is the best way to improve our availability of preoperative antibiotics for our surgical patients?
Thank you very much, Kavitha. Definitely preoperative antibiotics and prophylactic antibiotics are very, very essential in reducing surgical site infections. And for our study, prophylactic antibiotics was used as standard of practice for the patients. So the way you've been using it for your patients before is the way you'll use it. Majority of them would be at induction of anesthesia within the hour of surgery, etc., before incision. I do agree that surgical site infection is a complex thing, and there are many, many risk factors. Apart from that, we've just concluded a second trial. The results should be coming out very soon, in which we also looked at things like change of gloves and change of instruments. But with respect to antibiotics, I think that yes, it would be very wonderful if we can collaborate with farmers and look at the possibility of having antibiotics that will possibly be GI microorganisms will be sensitive to, But I think even with the antibiotics that we have at the moment, I think surgeons need to use them as recommended, because I think there is a lot of abuse of antibiotics, particularly in low and middle income countries. Once there's any little problem, just go on. So I think complying with the principles of antibiotic use is probably more important than getting new molecules. That would be my submission.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open it to the floor. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'll call on people just based on the order that I see everyone on my screen. So please raise your hand and I'll call on you accordingly. Radzi?
Hello, thank you for amazing presentation today. My name is Razi. I am a research fellow at the PGSSC. I'm a Malaysian neurosurgical trained care resident in Malaysia. I have a question for Prof. Yang. I love your paper. I read it multiple times, and we actually had a journal club discussing the paper 2 days ago. In planning for like all of us has aim to do multi-centered RCT, but you went one step further and plan for multi-country, multi-centered studies. When plan for this kind of studies, especially when come to like surgical cases, how do you plan to design it in such a way to ensure that at least the surgical site is sort of standardized in a way? Because, like, for example, Korea has much higher gastric cancer prevalence compared to like Malaysia, for example. Hence, the exposure and the experience might be different comparatively, and that, as it is, might actually affect the outcome for the patients. How do you account to that in your study? Thank you.
For the clinical study with EXPEL or clinical study Regatta. Regatta was for stage 4, so we did not ask D2 dissection. So it was rather, if you do D2 dissection, it's a violation. So less aggressive surgery. So we did not think it's a big problem to control the surgical scale, but we reviewed the study. We reviewed this cases intermittent. Every 4-6 months, we had investigator meeting and review the surgical procedure. But I mentioned that we did not expose the patient outcome, but we at least we look at the case, confirm the enrollment criteria as well as surgical scale. And so that was not an issue, but for expel study, it is supposed to receive D2 dissection. So that part has been addressed, but as you know, in Asian countries, we are very closely communicating, sharing experience. So Professor Jimmy So, at the beginning, he qualified surgeons, but accept the surgeons for his initiation. But the problem was rather the quality of follow-up or some data management, because these different countries has a different level of accuracy of follow-up. So that might be, in that sense, you are Dr. Ademiyowiwa mentioned about high income, middle income, low income country, but in gastric cancer surgery, treatment discrepancy probably that has been issue for this Asian among countries that has been should be that actually emphasized, or that gave me experience about very important is also the follow-up quality, and also the measurement of outcome too. That has been important. I'm not sure, I couldn't hear well from Melissa. So Kavita, if you can, please help me if I missed a point of a question.
Definitely, happy to. Dr. Ademiyowiwa, any thoughts on that question? Mainly, what do you recommend in terms of the best ways to conduct multi-center studies?
So thank you. I think the essential thing will be that you need very strong allies. You need a lot of training and retraining. Like I said, you need training in research ethics as well as good clinical practice when it comes to clinical trials. Then thirdly, I think there is also need, that's what we are just discovering. The training is not going to be limited only to the clinicians, but to support staff. So even when it comes to research governance, so data management, administration, and finance, all the people, because sometimes part of the challenges we had was, for example, transferring funds to peripheral hospitals. And it was just a simple training session that could solve that. So I think there is need for training. Then, of course, like I said, when we were going to start, the priorities were very clear. The objectives were very clear. And I think it's important, particularly if low and middle income countries are to be involved with high income countries, that they are involved right from the beginning. Because part of the issues that we raised, if I have time, I'll just explain one thing. So when this study was being conceived, it was supposed to be midline incisions only. And I told them, I said, look, if we are going to involve children, we cannot use only midline, because in pediatric surgery, we use transverse incisions. And so if I was not involved at the beginning, it would have been difficult to make such contribution. And as you will find out, we have about 10–12% of the patients who are pediatric patients. And I think that's the first time we are having such number of children participating in a trial. And I think that's a huge one. Since the results of the trial can then be easily translated to practice, including pediatric patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 641 Huntington Group. We're not able to hear you, actually. You're still muted. While they're figuring that out, Kate Isoken, do you mind going next? And we'll go back to 641 Huntington Group.
Okay, thank you, Kavita. My name is Kate Isoken Obayabona. I'm a specialist obstetrician from West African College of Surgeons and current PGSSC fellow. Thank you, Professor Yang and Professor Ademuyiwa for that thought-provoking presentation. It was very wonderful. My question is directed at Professor Ademuyiwa. And it's basically on research management and processes. This was a very large trial involving 54 sites across 7 countries. How were you able to collaborate in terms of, analyzing the data and, writing procedures? Okay. And secondly, in terms of going forward, what next? In terms of policy approach, what next? Are we looking to changing policies? Are we looking to looking at how we can reduce surgical site infection? Because from your study, you showed about 22% surgical site infection. Should we now channel policies to instead look towards how we can reduce surgical site infections instead? Thank you. That's my solution. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kate. And I think you've answered the second question yourself, but let me start with the first, which is how were we able to handle data? So one of the things we did from the beginning was that we knew that we could not collect data hard copy. So we used the red cap for our data collection. And each center, before any center is given a green light, I talked about the concept of green light. One of the checklists is that you must have had an SIV. So the SIV is the site initiation visit, which talks about patient recruitment and how the patient will move until exit from the trial. So is it that you are going to start from the clinic or the accident and emergency, and you discuss with the patient, you gain consent, then the surgery is performed. And at all these points, there was funding for each of the center to actually employ a research nurse and a data manager. So there are people whose job it is in all the 54 centers to ensure that data is collected. And then this data is uploaded electronically. And what a few of the staff that I showed you, what they would tell you is that regularly they receive mails almost on daily basis of queries where data is incomplete. And then they go back to the clinical team to ask them what has happened, and then they are able to fill it. So our data is really, really above 95% complete at the end. Now, you are absolutely correct that one of the recommendations of the study is that we believe that the WHO, on the strength of our study, may need to revisit those recommendations to start with, so that surgeons in low and middle income countries will be comfortable to use cheaper alternatives. And then the second thing, of course, is that we need to continue to engage and advocate in our individual countries on the fact that these measures could help even though they are cheaper measures. That's the second thing. Then the third thing, which is further research. I've just told you that we just completed another trial. Our trials are in a zoo. So this one is a Falcon trial. The trial we just completed is the cheetah trial, which is looking at change of gloves And then we also have a penguin trial, which is currently going on, in which we are looking at the impact of mouthwash and the incidence on post-operative pneumonia. And so we continue to do research and we continue to advocate. I think because of time, I should stop.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah.
641 Huntington. I'm sorry, we still can't hear you. There we go. Yes, perfect.
Oh, thank goodness. This was stressful. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yang and Adumuya, for two excellent studies that have contributed a lot. I'm a clinical researcher from Sweden, and I'm a research fellow here at the PGSSC. My question to both of you is that how did you control for patient consent across countries? For example, in the Falcon trial, I was also very interested to know how you were able to, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, interview patients by telephone and get results from patients there. And Dr. Yang, if you can also touch upon how your study, the EXPEL study, has maybe led to some policy changes in what surgeons are practicing now. Thank you.
So to summarize the question, how did you practice consent procedures, particularly during the COVID pandemic? And were there any policy changes based on both of your work?
Dr. Yan, do you want to go first? Or should I go first? All right. So, so I did say that consent procedure for Falcon, because surgery was going to be done, you need to consent physically. And the consent procedure were in two places. There was the consent for the surgery. And this consent for the surgery is done by the most senior surgeon available, who will explain both the risks and benefits of surgery. That is entirely a clinical governance issue. Now, for recruitment into the trial, the same person could do that, or the trial nurse could also do that. And essentially, after consenting for the surgery, obviously, then they engage them to tell them about this trial that's going on and what the benefits could be at the end of the day. And if they consent, then that is taken. For teenagers, their accent is also requested. Now, I don't understand what you mean by across countries, but that's the consent that we that's the consent procedure. Now, what's the second thing? I think there's a second
policy changes.
Yeah, so the essential policy change was the fact that when COVID happened, many of the patients could not come back for their assessment. So interestingly, there was a SWOT, that's a study within a trial that we did, that's the Talon study, in which we looked at a standardized structured telephone conversation to assess patients post-operatively. And it shows that the results are similar to coming to the hospital physically. So we had to do that because of COVID, and it was telephone interviews that we used for the 30-day assessment.
Yes. For our, I showed, presented a few studies. So depending on the result, if the result is yes, a positive result, certainly like street sign, like a street sign, it changed our practice. So for regatta trial, as I mentioned, we should not do a gastrectomy in stage 4. We wait patient response to chemotherapy. That has been one important conclusion. And for the expert study. If the result was positive, I mean, 10-liter irrigation of a peritoneal cavity reduced the peritoneal recurrence, then we would do that as a standard practice. But because it failed, we don't do extensive lavage, only 2-liter lavage. And in addition to, I would like to add one more thing at the beginning. We were talking about quality control. So before we had video available, now laparoscope easy to record, but in the old days, like a classic study, we asked the surgeon to record end of a surgery, the operation field, the important part of lymph node dissection. So at least those were helpful for quality control. And I would suggest that Dr. Ademuyiwa in Africa, the site infection of over 20%, that might be quite high. So whatever you try with local alcohol or whatever suture, it won't affect because it's so high. So from my experience, one advice for you is now everyone has a cellular phone. So when you're conducting some study, let them surgeon to document the surgical field, so how they did it. So it really expose, then transparency really help study quality. That's my advice.
Thank you. And we have about 1 to 2 minutes left in our question and answer session. Our last question is going to come from Megan Lim.
Thanks, Kavita, and thanks, Professor Yang and Professor Ademuyiwa for your excellent presentations. My question is to Professor Yang. So I noticed that as you started running more and more multi-center trials, do you find that it is much easier now that you have so much experience with multi-site, multi-center studies, that it is much easier to run the trials? Or do you find it more challenging because now the trials that you're running expand across multiple countries, multiple sites? And do you find any challenges in that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, but the beauty of or the benefit of a multi-center trial is not only for the conclusion. Yes, we are having selecting questions from here and there, and also new devices coming in, such as robot surgery. We are trying to prove it. But the most another very important benefit of this multi-center trial is communication sharing experience and making friendship, and that actually improve our surgical quality. So or practice quality, that I would like to emphasize.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for participating in this question and answer session. These are our last few minutes together. At the beginning of our session, all of you filled out data on where you're from. So I'm going to share my screen to show you exactly what we've gotten. Within the PGSSC, one of the things that we believe to be essential to the effective practice of global surgery is community. And in the spirit of research and data, this is our version of data on the community that you all and we all have been a part of during this, this first research seminar. In creating community, that's how we can do these multi-center studies. That's how we can do these multi-country studies. And so thank you all for being here today. We're looking forward to seeing you next time in November. There are people here from across the world. So in our last few moments, please feel free to take a look at our participant list, think about who you want to collaborate with, and use this as a community around which you can build your own work and the work of others around you. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you to our speakers. It was wonderful.